In fact, one of the most subtle forms of idolatry is when we try to reduce God to something that we can manage or control. Right? We might not be carving a statue, but we can still create mental images of God that they're far too small. If the God that's in your mind isn't the one that's in here, maybe your idol is also named Jesus. There's a story that illustrates this beautifully, okay? That's about 3 young men who were on a bus in Detroit in the 1930s. These guys, they were just really kind of just looking for trouble, right? And they decided to pick on a quiet man who was sitting on the back of the bus. They taunted him. They were trying to provoke a fight, but the man, he just sat there. He remained silent. Finally, after several minutes of this, though, the man, he stood up, and he was much, much larger than they realized. Right? Again, they're trying to pick a fight with this guy, looking for trouble. If this guy stands up, huge guy, and he hands each one of them his business card, and he calmly walks off the bus. And the business card read, Joe Louis, boxer. Now, if you don't know who Joe Louis was, he was the world heavyweight boxing champion. So those young men, they had absolutely no idea who they were dealing with, and their ignorance led them to act pretty foolishly and dangerously. But in the same way, when we diminish God in our minds, when we forget His power, when we forget His holiness, when we forget His love, His justness, we end up living in ways that don't align with who He truly is. Right? We might treat Him casually, right? Take His grace for granted, or maybe we fail to give Him the reverence that He deserves. And this ties back to what we said earlier about God being too big to reduce to something that we can control. So when we try to make God more manageable, we're essentially creating an idol, right? We're creating a God of our own making that's more comfortable for us to deal with. I want to give some examples of how we might do this, okay? So we might emphasize God's love at the expense of His holiness, right? Creating like a buddy God who never challenges us or calls us to be accountable. And this can lead to a casual attitude later towards sin, right? Thinking like, God loves me, so it doesn't matter how I live. He's just going to forgive me anyway. But remember, the God who is love is also the God who is light. And in Him, there's no darkness at all. It's 1 John 1:5. Or we might focus on God's justice without His mercy. Right? We could be seeing Him as a harsh judge, always waiting to punish us. And this can lead us to a life driven by fear rather than love, always trying to earn God's favor instead of resting in His grace. Or maybe we reduce God to a cosmic vending machine, thinking that if we just say the right prayers or we just do the right things, then He's obligated to give us what we want. And this kind of name it and claim it theology, really it turns God into a means to an end rather than the end Himself. It forgets that God's ultimate goal, it's not our comfort, but it's our conformity to Christ. And we might limit God, right, to what we can understand, refusing to accept the mystery and the transcendence that are essential to His nature. This can lead to arrogance, right? Thinking that we have God all figured out. One of the death sentences of pastors in my mind, like, I figured it all out. But when in reality, as Isaiah 55:8-9 reminds us, His thoughts and ways are far above ours. So all of those things that we've just talked about, they're forms of idolatry because what do? They replace the true God with a more convenient version of our own making.